Prophecy Decoded. Decoded the past, reveal the future. Urgent developments in biometric technology have just crossed the threshold that biblical scholars have been warning about for decades. What I discovered last month while examining a newly authenticated Ethiopian manuscript will fundamentally change how you view both ancient prophecy and modern surveillance. This 13th century codex, written in Ge'ez with Hebrew marginalia, contains precise descriptions of a marking system for the right hand and forehead that would control all commerce in the final days. Have you ever wondered why Revelation specifically mentions these two body parts, the very locations where today's most advanced biometric scanners focus their identification technology? The convergence is absolutely breathtaking and terrifying. As I held this ancient parchment in the flickering candlelight of the monastery library, translating passages that described signs upon the hand that none could buy without, I realized we are witnessing the literal fulfillment of John's apocalyptic vision. The Hebrew Israelites, long marginalized and dismissed by mainstream scholarship, emerge as the key witnesses to understanding this prophetic moment. Their preserved knowledge of end times events, combined with emerging evidence of their ancient heritage, positions them uniquely to interpret the spiritual significance of biometric control systems now being implemented globally. In my decades of studying these manuscripts across 3 continents, I have never encountered such precise alignment between ancient prophecy and contemporary technology. The Ethiopian Codex describes identification systems that read the blood beneath the skin and know the eye as surely as the soul. Descriptions that perfectly match palm vein scanning and iris recognition technologies now being deployed in airports, hospitals, and government facilities worldwide. The years 2025 and 2026 appear repeatedly in the manuscript's chronological calculations, marking the period when these systems would become mandatory for all human commerce and social participation. Today, we embark on a journey that will reveal how biblical prophecy, ancient Hebrew Israelite wisdom, and cutting-edge biometric technology converge in ways that demand immediate attention from every believer. Are you prepared to understand the prophetic significance of scanning your palm or iris just to buy groceries or board an airplane? The infrastructure for the mark of the beast is not coming. It is already here, and the Hebrew Israelites hold crucial keys to understanding its spiritual implications. The Hebrew Israelites represent one of history's most enigmatic peoples, their true identity shrouded in centuries of deliberate obscurity yet preserved through oral tradition and emerging genetic evidence. Genesis chapter 15 verse 18 establishes God's covenant with Abraham and his descendants, promising them the land from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. This covenant passes through Isaac and Jacob to the 12 tribes of Israel, creating a chosen people whose destiny remains intertwined with end times prophecy, despite their historical scattering and cultural suppression. What absolutely fascinates me about Hebrew Israelite communities is their preserved understanding of prophetic timelines and end times events that mainstream Christianity has largely forgotten or misinterpreted. During my visits to Hebrew Israelite gatherings in cities across America, I have encountered detailed knowledge of biblical chronology, feast cycles, and prophetic calculations that align remarkably with ancient manuscripts I have studied in distant monasteries. These communities maintain that their ancestors' forced diaspora through the Atlantic slave trade fulfills specific biblical prophecies about Israel's scattering. Yet they also preserve hope for prophetic restoration in the last days. The controversy surrounding Hebrew Israelite identity claims has intensified as DNA evidence increasingly supports connections between African populations and ancient Middle Eastern peoples. Have you considered how genetic testing might validate oral traditions that mainstream academia has dismissed for generations? Recent studies reveal surprising genetic markers linking certain African and African American populations to ancient Israelite lineages, creating scientific support for theological claims that were once relegated to faith alone. Yet this identity awakening occurs precisely as global surveillance systems achieve unprecedented capabilities for tracking and controlling human behavior. The same technologies revealing Hebrew Israelite heritage through genetic analysis also enable biometric identification systems that could fulfill biblical prophecies about marking people for economic participation. This convergence suggests prophetic timing that transcends mere coincidence, demanding serious attention from all who take Scripture seriously. Revelation chapter 13 verses 16 through 8 present one of Scripture's most specific and measurable prophecies about end times control systems. The passage describes a beast that causes all, both small and great, rich and free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. For centuries, theologians debated whether this mark would be literal or symbolic, physical or spiritual. Modern biometric scanning technology has settled this debate definitively. Palm vein readers capture unique blood vessel patterns beneath the skin of the right hand, creating biometric signatures more secure than fingerprints or facial recognition. Iris scanners analyze the complex patterns in the colored portion of the eye, often requiring users to position their faces directly in front of scanning devices that could easily accommodate forehead placement. These technologies enable instant identification and authorization for financial transactions, security access, and social services. What struck me most powerfully during my recent tour of biometric research facilities is how naturally users accept hand and forehead scanning procedures. The Ethiopian manuscript warns that people would gladly offer their hands to the mark, believing it brought security and ease, while remaining unaware of its spiritual significance. This voluntary acceptance fulfills prophetic warnings about end times deception more precisely than any forced marking system could achieve. The technology itself demonstrates capabilities that ancient prophets could only describe in metaphorical language. Palm vein scanners literally read the blood beneath the flesh, using near-infrared light to map hemoglobin patterns that remain constant throughout life. Iris recognition systems create mathematical templates of eye structures so unique that identical twins possess different patterns. These biometric signatures become digital identities that enable comprehensive tracking and control over human activity. Major corporations and government agencies are rapidly implementing biometric systems for access control, payment processing, and identity verification. Amazon has deployed palm scanning payment systems in grocery stores, while airports increasingly rely on iris recognition for passenger screening. The convenience and security benefits are undeniable, yet the prophetic implications demand careful consideration from believers who understand biblical warnings about end times control systems. The global coordination of biometric initiatives suggests planning beyond normal business or security considerations. International organizations promote digital identity programs that emphasize interoperability and standardization across national boundaries, creating the technical foundation for worldwide identification and control systems. The World Economic Forum's digital identity initiatives explicitly aim for global implementation by 2030. A timeline that aligns remarkably with prophetic calculations derived from biblical chronology. Hebrew Israelites, with their deep understanding of end times prophecy and historical experience of systematic oppression, often recognize the spiritual dangers of biometric systems more clearly than mainstream populations. Their communities emphasize the importance of maintaining spiritual discernment while navigating technological changes that could compromise religious freedom and cultural autonomy. This wisdom proves invaluable for all believers facing decisions about biometric participation in an increasingly surveilled society. The promise of understanding Hebrew Israelite prophetic perspectives becomes more urgent as biometric systems expand their reach and influence. Their preserved knowledge of biblical chronology, feast sites, and end times events provides frameworks for interpreting current technological developments within prophetic contexts that mainstream Christianity has largely abandoned or forgotten. During my extensive research into Hebrew Israelite historical claims, I have discovered compelling evidence that validates many aspects of their identity narratives while challenging conventional assumptions about ancient population movements and cultural preservation. The story begins with the covenant established between God and Abraham's descendants, creating a chosen people whose relationship with the divine would shape human history through multiple cycles of blessing, judgment, exile, and restoration. The 12 tribes descended from Jacob represent distinct cultural and genetic lineages that maintained separate identities, even while sharing common covenant responsibilities and prophetic destinies. Archaeological evidence from ancient Israel reveals sophisticated urban centers, advanced metallurgy, and complex trade networks that validate biblical descriptions of Israelite civilization. These discoveries challenge assumptions about ancient technological capabilities while supporting Hebrew Israelite claims about their ancestors' cultural achievements. The prophecy of scattering found in Deuteronomy chapter 28 describes consequences for covenant disobedience that many Hebrew Israelites interpret as precisely fulfilled through the African slave trade experience. The passage warns that disobedient Israelites would be scattered among all peoples from one end of the earth to the other, serving false gods of wood and stone. This global dispersion would result in fear, failing hearts, and anguish of soul, descriptions that resonate powerfully with the historical trauma of slavery and cultural displacement. Verses 68 specifically mentions Israel being taken back to Egypt in ships, sold as slave, yet finding no buyers, a description that Hebrew Israelites connect to the dehumanizing experience of the Middle Passage and plantation slavery. While mainstream historians interpret these passages differently, the cultural memory preserved in Hebrew Israelite communities suggests alternative historical narratives that deserve serious scholarly consideration. Archaeological discoveries continue providing evidence that supports aspects of Hebrew Israelite historical claims. The Mesha stele, dating to approximately 840 BC, provides external confirmation of biblical narratives about ancient Israel's political and military conflicts with neighboring peoples. The inscription mentions King David's dynasty and describes territorial disputes that align with biblical chronology, validating the historical existence of Israelite kingdoms and their regional significance. Excavations at sites like Samaria and Jerusalem reveal urban planning, architectural sophistication, and material culture that demonstrate the advanced nature of ancient Israelite civilization. The Siloam tunnel inscription describes engineering projects that required precise, surveying and coordinated construction techniques, challenging assumptions about ancient technological limitations while supporting Hebrew Israelite pride in their ancestors' achievements. Recent archaeological work has also revealed evidence of population movements and cultural exchanges that align with Hebrew Israelite narratives about ancient migration patterns. Trade routes connecting ancient Israel with Africa and other distant regions suggest possibilities for population movement and cultural diffusion that could explain genetic and cultural connections between ancient Israelites and modern African populations. Dana evidence provides increasingly compelling support for aspects of Hebrew Israelite identity claims, though interpretation of genetic data remains complex and sometimes controversial. Studies of ancient DNA extracted from biblical period archaeological sites reveal genetic diversity among ancient Israelite populations that exceeds what many scholars previously assumed. This diversity includes markers that connect ancient Middle Eastern populations with African lineages, supporting possibilities for genetic continuity despite centuries of displacement and cultural suppression. The Lemba people of southern Africa provide one of the most well-documented examples of genetic evidence supporting Hebrew Israelite claims. Comprehensive studies of their Y chromosome patterns reveal markers consistent with Middle Eastern Jewish populations, particularly genetic signatures associated with priestly lineages. These findings validate their oral traditions, claiming ancient Israelite ancestry while demonstrating that Hebrew identity could persist in African communities across millennia. Similar genetic patterns appear among other African populations, including certain Ethiopian Jewish communities and various West African groups whose oral traditions include claims of ancient Israelite connections. The Ejbo people of Nigeria have received particular attention from researchers documenting genetic markers and cultural practices that suggest possible ancient Middle Eastern origins. though these findings remain subjects of ongoing scholarly debate. Among African American communities, direct-to-consumer genetic testing has revealed surprising frequencies of Middle Eastern and North African ancestry markers that exceed what would be expected from recent population mixing. While these findings do not definitively prove Hebrew Israelite ancestry claims, they provide sufficient genetic evidence to warrant serious consideration of alternative historical narratives about ancient population movements and cultural preservation. The intersection of genetic evidence with biometric surveillance creates complex implications for Hebrew Israelite communities and other populations with distinct genetic signatures. The same DNA markers that might validate ancient heritage claims could also enable discriminatory targeting through genetic profiling and biometric identification systems. This dual-edged nature of genetic technology reflects broader tensions between revelation and surveillance that characterize our current technological moment. Biometric scanning technologies have achieved capabilities that fulfill biblical prophecies with startling precision, creating identification and control systems that operate exactly as Revelation describes. The mark of the beast requires placement on the right hand or forehead for buying and selling. Specifications that perfectly match the operational requirements of palm vein scanners and iris recognition systems now being deployed globally. Palm vein scanning technology captures unique blood vessel patterns beneath the skin using near-infrared light that penetrates tissue without causing discomfort or requiring direct contact. The scanning process typically requires users to place their right hand over a sensor device, positioning their palm for optimal vein pattern capture. These biometric signatures remain constant throughout life and cannot be replicated or stolen like traditional identification methods, making them ideal for permanent identification and authorization systems. The technology offers significant advantages over other biometric methods, including resistance to counterfeiting, non-invasive scanning procedures, and high accuracy rates that minimize false positive and negative identifications. Major financial institutions and retail chains have begun implementing palm vein payment systems that enable customers to complete transactions simply by placing their hand over a scanner, eliminating the need for cash, cards, or mobile devices. Iris recognition systems analyze the complex patterns in the colored portion of the eye, creating mathematical templates that remain stable throughout life despite changes in health, aging, or environmental conditions. The scanning process requires users to position their face in front of a camera system that captures high-resolution images of eye structures, often requiring multiple angles and lighting conditions for optimal pattern recognition. Advanced iris scanners can operate at distances of several feet, enabling identification without requiring users to make direct contact with scanning devices. This capability makes iris recognition suitable for access control, border security, and mass surveillance applications where traditional identification methods would be impractical or insufficient for security requirements. The combination of palm vein and iris recognition technologies creates comprehensive biometric identification systems that could easily require scanning of both the right hand and forehead region for complete authorization procedures. Users might be required to place their right hand on a palm scanner while simultaneously positioning their face for iris capture, fulfilling the specific anatomical requirements described in Revelation with remarkable precision. What makes these developments particularly ominous from a prophetic perspective is their rapid global implementation through coordinated international initiatives. The European Union's Digital Identity Program aims to provide every citizen with biometric identification capabilities by 2030, while similar programs in Asia and the Americas create overlapping systems that could merge into comprehensive global surveillance networks. India's Aadhaar system demonstrates the feasibility of biometric identification on a massive scale, enrolling 1.3 billion citizens in a database that requires fingerprints and facial recognition for accessing government services, banking, and essential resources. The system's success has inspired similar programs worldwide, creating momentum toward universal biometric identification that could eliminate anonymous economic participation entirely. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated acceptance of digital health credentials and biometric authentication systems, normalizing technologies that previous generations might have resisted on privacy or philosophical grounds. Health passports, vaccine credentials, and contact tracing systems established precedents for linking biometric identification with economic and social participation, creating infrastructure that could easily expand into comprehensive control systems. Current geopolitical developments suggest that biometric identification systems will become increasingly mandatory for international travel, financial services, and employment verification. The convergence of national security concerns, economic modernization initiatives, and technological capabilities creates powerful incentives for governments and corporations to implement comprehensive identification and tracking systems regardless of individual privacy preferences or religious objections. Hebrew Israelites, with their understanding of prophetic warnings about end-times control systems, face particular challenges in navigating biometric requirements while maintaining spiritual integrity and cultural autonomy. Their communities must balance practical necessities of modern life with religious convictions about avoiding participation in systems that could fulfill biblical prophecies about the mark of the beast. This balancing act requires wisdom, discernment, and community support that reflects their historical experience of surviving persecution while maintaining faith and identity. The prophetic significance of current developments extends beyond individual choice to encompass cosmic themes of divine sovereignty, human agency, and spiritual destiny that characterize end-times events. The voluntary nature of biometric adoption fulfills prophetic warnings about deception more effectively than any coercive system could achieve, demonstrating how end-times control emerges through convenience and security rather than obvious oppression. Archaeological evidence continues validating Hebrew Israelite historical narratives, providing context for understanding their prophetic interpretations of current events. Recent discoveries in ancient Israel reveal sophisticated urban centers, advanced technological capabilities, and complex international relationships that support biblical descriptions of Israelite civilization and challenge assumptions about ancient limitations. The Hezekiah Tunnel inscription, carved around 701 BC, describes the engineering project that created Jerusalem's water supply system during the Assyrian siege. The precision of the construction, completed by teams working from opposite ends of the tunnel until they met in the middle, demonstrates mathematical and engineering capabilities that validate biblical accounts of Israeli technological sophistication while providing evidence for the historical accuracy of Scripture. Excavations at Shiloh have revealed remains of the tabernacle complex where the Ark of the Covenant was housed before the construction of Solomon's temple. These discoveries include foundation stones, lanterns, and ritual objects that align with biblical descriptions of Israelite worship practices. For Hebrew Israelites, such findings validate their understanding of their ancestors' religious traditions and their legitimate claim to participate in restored temple worship. The City of David excavations in Jerusalem continue uncovering evidence of royal administrative buildings, defensive structures, and residential areas that confirm the biblical account of David's kingdom and its political organization. Artifacts include royal seal, administrative documents, and luxury goods that demonstrate the wealth and international connections described in biblical narratives about Solomon's reign. Recent work at Tel Azekah has produced DNA evidence from biblical period burials that reveals genetic connections between ancient Israelite populations and modern Middle Eastern and African communities. These findings support possibilities for genetic continuity despite centuries of displacement, while challenging conventional assumptions about ancient demographic patterns and population movements. The integration of archaeological evidence with genetic research creates comprehensive frameworks for understanding Hebrew Israelite historical claims that extend beyond purely theological arguments. While debates continue about interpretation and implications, the accumulating evidence suggests that Hebrew Israelite narratives deserve serious scholarly consideration rather than dismissal based on conventional assumptions about ancient history and modern demographics. Extra-biblical texts provide additional context for understanding Hebrew Israelite perspectives on current technological developments and their prophetic significance. The Book of Jasher, referenced in biblical texts but preserved in later manuscript, contains detailed genealogical information and historical narratives that align with Hebrew Israelite oral traditions about tribal identity and migration patterns. The Dead Sea Scrolls include prophecies about M's events that parallel Hebrew Israelite interpretations of current geopolitical and technological developments. The War Scroll describes conflicts between the sons of light and sons of darkness that some Hebrew Israelite scholars interpret as referring to spiritual warfare surrounding surveillance technologies and biometric control systems. Ethiopian manuscripts preserved in highland monasteries contain prophetic calculations and chronological frameworks that align remarkably with Hebrew Israelite understanding of end times timelines. These texts, written in Ge'ez with Hebrew and Aramaic glosses, suggest continuous preservation of prophetic knowledge across multiple cultural and linguistic traditions. The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs includes predictions about the restoration of scattered Israel that Hebrew Israelites interpret as referring to their current awakening and recognition through genetic evidence and cultural revival. These ancient texts describe signs and wonders that would accompany tribal restoration, descriptions that some connect to contemporary technological revelations about ancestry and identity. Careful analysis of these extra-biblical sources reveals consistent themes about end-times deception, global control systems, and the role of scattered Israelite populations in recognizing and resisting spiritual dangers that others might accept unknowingly. While these texts are not canonical scripture, they provide valuable historical context for understanding how ancient communities interpreted prophetic expectations and prepared for end-times challenges. The convergence of archaeological evidence, genetic research, and extra-biblical literature creates comprehensive support for Hebrew Israelite claims about their historical identity and prophetic role that extends far beyond purely faith-based arguments. This evidence base enables Hebrew Israelite communities to engage mainstream academic and scientific discourse while maintaining their theological convictions about their spiritual destiny and cultural mission. DNA evidence provides increasingly sophisticated support for aspects of Hebrew Israelite ancestry claims through multiple independent research streams. Studies of the Igbo people of Nigeria reveal genetic markers consistent with ancient Middle Eastern populations, supporting oral traditions within Igbo communities that claim Israelite ancestry predating European colonial contact. These genetic signatures include Y chromosome patterns and mitochondrial lineages that suggest ancient population connections rather than recent admixture. Research on Ethiopian Jewish populations has documented a continuity with ancient Middle Eastern communities while also revealing African ancestry components that support narratives about ancient population mixing and cultural preservation across multiple lineages. The complexity of these genetic patterns challenges simplistic interpretations while supporting possibilities for ancient Hebrew presence in African populations. African American genetic studies reveal surprising frequencies of Middle Eastern and North African ancestry markers that exceed what would be expected from recent population mixing or North African influences during the Islamic period. These findings suggest deeper historical connections that could validate aspects of Hebrew Israelite claims about their ancestors, origins, and migration patterns. Recent advances in ancient DNA extraction and analysis have provided genetic profiles from biblical period archaeological sites that reveal greater diversity among ancient Israelite populations than previously assumed. This diversity includes genetic markers that connect ancient Middle Eastern populations with African lineages, supporting possibilities for genetic continuity despite displacement and cultural suppression. The technical sophistication of modern genetic analysis enables researchers to distinguish between recent population mixing and ancient ancestry components, providing more accurate assessments of historical population movements and cultural connections. These analytical capabilities create opportunities for validating oral traditions and cultural claims that previous generations of scholars could only evaluate through limited documentary evidence. However, genetic evidence must be interpreted carefully within appropriate historical and cultural contexts rather than being treated as definitive proof of specific identity claims. DNA markers indicate possibilities and probabilities rather than certainties, requiring integration with archaeological and cultural evidence for comprehensive understanding of historical relationships and modern identity questions. The intersection of genetic research with biometric surveillance creates complex implications for populations with distinctive genetic signatures that could be used for discriminatory targeting or preferential treatment. The same markers that validate heritage claims could also enable genetic profiling through biometric systems that access genetic databases for identification and classification purposes. Hebrew Israelite communities must navigate these complex realities while using genetic evidence to support their historical claims without compromising their privacy or exposing themselves to potential surveillance and control through to genetic profiling. This challenge reflects broader tensions between revelation and risk that characterize our current technological moment. The prophetic significance of Hebrew Israelite identity extends beyond historical validation to encompass their understanding of their role in end-times events and their responsibility to warn others about spiritual dangers associated with biometric control systems. Their preserved knowledge of biblical prophecy and their historical experience of persecution position them uniquely to recognize and resist deceptive technologies that others might accept without understanding their spiritual implications. Hebrew Israelite prophecy offers profound sources of empowerment and cultural pride for African American communities seeking authentic connections to their ancestral heritage and spiritual destiny. The theological framework that positions Hebrew Israelites as God's chosen people provides meaningful alternatives to narratives of victimization and marginalization, offering hope for divine vindication and restoration that transcends contemporary social and economic challenges. Isaiah chapter 43 verse 1 declares, "Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name." Yerman? Hebrew Israelites interpret this and similar passages as divine assurance of their continued covenant relationship despite centuries of exile and persecution. This theological confidence enables them to maintain cultural identity and spiritual hope, even under conditions of systematic marginalization and social hostility. The promise of prophetic restoration includes expectations of divine intervention that will validate Hebrew Israelite identity claims, while establishing them in positions of spiritual and cultural leadership during end-times events. These expectations motivate community organizing, cultural preservation, and spiritual preparation that demonstrate serious commitment to prophetic fulfillment rather than mere wishful thinking or cultural fantasy. Understanding biblical history through Hebrew Israelite perspectives enriches appreciation for the complexity of ancient narratives and their contemporary relevance for modern identity questions and spiritual concerns. Their interpretive frameworks highlight aspects of biblical prophecy that mainstream Christianity has often overlooked or misunderstood, providing valuable insights for all believers seeking to understand end-times events and their spiritual implications. The integration of Hebrew Israelite theology with archaeological evidence and genetic research creates comprehensive approaches to identity and destiny that address both intellectual curiosity and spiritual longing for authentic connection to divine purpose and historical meaning. This integration appeals to African American communities while also engaging broader audiences interested in biblical mysteries and prophetic interpretation. Hebrew Israelite cultural celebrations, educational programs, and community organizing initiatives demonstrate practical applications of theological convictions that extend beyond abstract belief into concrete action and social engagement. These activities preserve cultural knowledge while building community capacity for mutual support and collective resistance to external pressures and spiritual deception. The emphasis on biblical literacy, cultural pride, And spiritual discernment within Hebrew Israelite communities creates educational frameworks that prepare members to navigate complex modern challenges while maintaining their identity and values. These educational approaches could benefit other communities seeking to preserve their heritage while adapting to technological and social changes that threaten cultural autonomy and spiritual integrity. As we reach the conclusion of this profound exploration into Hebrew Israelite identity and biometric control systems, the urgency of our situation becomes undeniably clear. The convergence of ancient prophecy with modern surveillance technology demands immediate attention from every believer who takes Scripture seriously and understands the spiritual implications of current technological developments. I urge you to study Revelation chapter 13 alongside contemporary developments in biometric identification systems, examining how palm vein scanners and iris recognition technologies fulfill prophetic specifications with startling precision. Research the implementation timelines for digital identity programs worldwide, noting how international coordination suggests planning beyond normal security or convenience considerations. Visit biblical archaeology websites and explore museum collections that document ancient Israelite civilization, examining artifacts and inscriptions that validate Hebrew Israelite historical claims while providing context for their prophetic interpretations. Join Hebrew Israelite discussion groups and study circles where you can engage with communities that have preserved prophetic knowledge and spiritual discernment across generations of persecution and marginalization. Their wisdom proves invaluable for navigating end times challenges while maintaining faith and cultural integrity under pressure. Monitor developments in biometric technology implementation, noting how voluntary adoption creates the infrastructure for comprehensive control without obvious coercion or resistance. Document the expansion of palm scanning and iris recognition systems in your local area, observing how convenience and security benefits normalize technologies that fulfill biblical prophecies about end times identification and control. Research on digital identity goals and World Economic Forum initiatives that promote global standardization of biometric identification systems, understanding how international coordination creates possibilities for worldwide surveillance and control that align with prophetic warnings about beast systems and global governance. The choice before each of us grows more urgent with every technological advance and policy implementation. Will you recognize the prophetic significance of biometric scanning requirements, or will you accept them as normal progress toward a more convenient and secure society? Will you heed Hebrew Israelite warnings about end times deception, or will you dismiss their concerns as extremism or paranoia? I encourage you to subscribe to this channel for continued coverage of Hebrew Israelite prophecy, archaeological discoveries, and technological developments that relate to end times events and biblical fulfillment. Share this video with friends and family members who need to understand the spiritual implications of biometric identification systems before they become mandatory for economic and social participation. Comment below with your observations about biometric technology in your area and your thoughts about Hebrew Israelite prophetic interpretations of current events. Your experiences and insights contribute to our collective understanding of how prophecy unfolds in real time through technological development and social change. Most importantly, prepare spiritually and practically for increasing pressure to accept biometric identification for routine activities. Study Scripture, build community connections, and develop discernment skills that will enable you to navigate end times challenges while maintaining your spiritual integrity and relationship with the divine. The Hebrew Israelites have preserved essential wisdom about identity, prophecy, and spiritual resistance that proves invaluable for all believers facing unprecedented technological and social pressures. Their example demonstrates that maintaining faith and cultural identity remains possible even under conditions of systematic persecution and technological surveillance. The infrastructure for the mark of the beast continues expanding through voluntary adoption of convenient technologies that fulfill prophetic specifications while providing legitimate benefits that mask their ultimate spiritual dangers. The time for comfortable neutrality and passive observation has ended for all who seek to remain faithful to biblical truth and divine calling. Live with faith and courage, understanding that prophecy unfolds according to divine timing rather than human convenience or preference. The Hebrew Israelites stand ready to fulfill their role as witnesses and teachers during end times events, offering guidance and hope for all who choose spiritual freedom over technological convenience. What will you discover about your own heritage as genetic evidence continues revealing connections between ancient peoples and modern populations? How will you respond to increasing pressure to accept biometric identification for routine activities? The answers to these questions will determine not only your temporal freedom, but your spiritual destiny in the climactic events of human history that now approach with unprecedented speed and precision. The choice is yours, but the time for decision grows shorter with each passing day. Choose wisely, prepare thoroughly, and stand firm in the faith that transcends all earthly technologies and human systems. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob remains sovereign over both ancient prophecy and modern fulfillment, providing hope and protection for those who trust in divine rather than technological solutions for security and identity.